We are now just a couple of weeks away from the release of the 2025 college football playoff bracket, and there are still a lot of teams left in contention. At this point, it seems like the only two locks are Indiana and Ohio State, but things could change over the next couple of weeks, as let's say somehow Ohio State loses out and Indiana loses to Purdue or something. Again, nothing is guaranteed in the modern college football world, and in today's video, we're just going to talk about every remaining contender in the college football playoff, as we're going to go through who the teams are, how they've done, and what they have left. It's going to be a pretty simple video, but before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about every college football playoff contender left in the season. Okay, so we're first going to start in the American Conference, and there are a couple of teams that are remaining fighting for that spot, and somehow, some way, the Navy midshipmen are still fighting. They are currently 8-2, and their only losses come against North Texas and Notre Dame. Notre Dame is not a bad loss at all, but the North Texas one definitely hurts a little bit. This past weekend, they knocked off number 24 USF and put their playoff hopes on life support, and their other wins came against FAU, Temple, Air Force, Rice, Tulsa, UAB, and VMI. For the rest of the season, they play against Memphis and Army, and they only have one more game. And what's interesting is the Army game is actually played after the bracket is announced, so their path is beating Memphis and then winning the American Conference title, and then hoping for some luck. John Sumrall is one of the top names in the college football coaching world, and so far his Green Wave have had an incredible season. They beat both Duke and Northwestern in the non-con, and then lost to UTSA and Ole Miss. The UTSA loss is definitely terrible, but they also have wins over Memphis, FAU, Tulsa, East Carolina, and Army, plus South Alabama. Currently, the Green Wave are pretty much in the same boat as Navy, as they better win out, win the American Conference, and then hope for some prayers and some other teams to fall apart. The remaining games come against Temple and Charlotte, which they should win. The North Texas Mean Green have been one of the stories of the year in college football, as led by head coach Eric Morris and their new star quarterback Drew Mestemaker. The Mean Green are currently 9-1 and are ranked for the first time in a long time. They ended up beating Lamar, Western Michigan, Washington State, Army, and South Alabama in the month of September before dropping a game to number 24 USF. While it looked like it buried the hatchet for them, they have now won 4 straight games against UTSA, Charlotte, Navy, and UAB, and with remaining games against Rice and Temple, they realistically should be 11-1, make the American Conference Championship game, and then if they win that, they'd be 12-1, and like the other teams in the American, just hoping for a miracle at this point. North Texas at minimum has one of the best stories in college football this year, and they still have a chance. And finally, the last contender in the American is the USF Bulls, and statistically, they pretty much are done, but they might be at like 1%. They ended up beating number 25 Boise State and beat number 13 Florida on the road, and then they ended up losing to Miami. They won 4 straight games against South Carolina State, Charlotte, North Texas, and FAU, before losing by 3 against Memphis and then losing by 3 against Navy. They also had a win against UTSA, and to finish the year they play UAB and Rice. USF should go 9-3, and if they win out, I think they make the American Conference Championship, I'm not sure, but if they do, and they end up beating a school like North Texas again, then they will have 2 wins over them, a win over Navy, and then 2 wins against Florida and Boise State, with one of their losses being to a potential playoff team in Miami, but again, I don't know. USF feels like they're pretty much eliminated, but because of their strength of schedule, I still think they have maybe a 1% chance. In the ACC, the first school we need to talk about is the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, who really by far have the best chance of getting in the playoff. They're currently ranked number 16 and 9-1 in the country, and they have wins over Colorado, Clemson, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Duke, Syracuse, and most recently Boston College. They ended up losing a game to NC State, in which their defense gave up 48 points, but Haynes King has been insane, Brent Key is a good coach, and Georgia Tech is winning when it matters. They feel a lot like 2022 TCU, to be honest. They will definitely get tested the last 2 weeks, though, as they face off with a ranked Pitt team and number 5 Georgia, and honestly, that game will pretty much decide it. If they beat Georgia, they're probably getting in no matter what. If they lose, they just need to win the ACC title and then hope that they get selected. The Virginia Cavaliers are also a lot like 2022 TCU, as they just barely keep getting by in their games. Led by Tony Elliott, who I personally thought would be fired, they lost an early non-conference game to NC State, and since then were pretty much perfect in close games. They beat both Florida State and Louisville in double overtime, beat Wazoo by 2 points, beat UNC in overtime, and then won a close game over Cal. Unfortunately, they lost to Wake Forest as Chandler Morris didn't play. Then this past weekend, they beat Duke 34-17. Virginia is currently 9-2, and if they beat Virginia Tech, they'll be 10-2 and in the ACC title. And then if they win that, you kind of have to assume they'll get in, but I don't know. The playoff committee can do whatever they want at this point, and none of the ACC teams really pop off of the page, and the only big brand that's left is Miami. But maybe they'll factor in Chandler Morris being out against Wake and that NC State loss being in week 2. But either way, Virginia's been a great story, and they're still in contention for a playoff spot. Statistically, I believe SMU is still in the playoff race, but it's at like 1%. As to start out the year, they lost in double overtime to Baylor, lost a close game to TCU, and then recently, a couple weeks ago, also lost to Wake Forest. Wake Forest keeps knocking off all these teams. Their most impressive win is an overtime game against number 10 Miami, but outside of that, their resume isn't super strong as they beat up on a bunch of bad teams, but to finish the year, they will play a decent Louisville team and also have to play Cal, and if they do win out, they'll go to the ACC title game, where if they win, they would be 10-3. I honestly highly doubt they would get in, but there is still a chance that they would right now. Granted, it's very low. And finally, we have the number 15 Miami Hurricanes, who are currently 8-2, and honestly the best hope for the ACC right now. To start out the season, the Canes beat both number 6 Notre Dame and a top 25 USF team before also taking care of Florida. The win over Florida State doesn't look as good anymore, and they would lose 2 games against SMU and Louisville, both of which were close. They had a real chance in that Louisville game before Carson Beck threw a pick, and then the SMU game was obviously overtime, so it was close. Miami is currently 8-2, and they need a lot of help if they want to make the ACC title. They'll have road games against Virginia Tech and Pitt, and if they do win both of those, I think they do need help to get to the ACC title game, but at that point, if they get there and win, I think the Canes get in, and their brand will definitely help them out in my opinion. Going over to the Big 12, we also have 4 teams that are still left in playoff contention, and the first one is Texas Tech, who is pretty much in the driver's seat at this point. Everyone knows the Red Raiders story, as they're loaded on offense and defense, and they went through their early schedule pretty much untouched. They beat Pine Bluff, Kent State, Oregon State, Utah, Houston, and Kansas before suffering their first loss against ASU, in which Baron Morton was out. They then blanked Oklahoma State, beat K-State, and then destroyed number 7 BYU. This past weekend they killed UCF, and Texas Tech is in an incredible spot. They are pretty much a lock at this point, and the only way they would miss is if they lose to West Virginia and then lose in the Big 12 title game, and that would put them at 10-3, and they would probably get left out. In my opinion, Texas Tech is pretty much a lock, and if they beat West Virginia, they are in for sure. At this point, the BYU Cougars are going to need some help, but there is still a path for them getting into the college football playoff as well. Led by their true freshman quarterback, Bear Bachmeier, BYU has come out of nowhere in 2025, as I did not expect this, and they ended up being perfect through their first 8 games. They beat number 23 Utah, Iowa State, Arizona, West Virginia, Colorado, ECU, Stanford, and Portland State. They were really solid, but finally they lost number 8 Texas Tech, and the game really wasn't all that close. We ended up seeing them bounce back this past weekend as they would kill TCU 44-13. They still have games against number 25 Cincinnati and UCF, and if the Cougars win out, they will be 11-1 going into the Big 12 game, and at that point, if they win, they're in, and if they lose, they'll be sweating it out, but would still have a chance at getting an at-large. Like some of the other teams on the list today, Utah's hopes of getting into the college football playoff are sort of on life support right now. To start out the year, they beat UCLA, Cal Poly, and Wyoming before losing to Texas Tech. They'd also beat West Virginia and ASU, and then in recent memory, they beat Colorado, Cincinnati, and Baylor. Their 2 losses are to BYU and Texas Tech, and if you can't figure it out by now, they need those 2 teams to lose. Texas Tech and BYU are actually in good positions, and if Utah can get to the Big 12 championship game with 2 losses, they can get into the playoff if they win, but in order to get to the Big 12 championship, they've got to see Texas Tech or BYU lose. Ultimately, Utah statistically has a chance, but I don't think Tech or BYU are losing, and that means they're going to end up on the outside of the bracket. The Houston Cougars are in the same position as Utah, except I think it's a lot worse off for them. Technically speaking, on a graphic I saw on Saturday, Houston is still in playoff contention, as to start out the year they beat Oregon State, Colorado Rice, and Stephen F. Austin, before then losing to Texas Tech. They also beat Oklahoma State, Arizona, and ASU before losing to West Virginia. They barely squeaked by UCF, and to finish the year they have TCU and Baylor. Both of their losses are in the conference, so they're going to need some help. Even if they go 10-2, they likely aren't getting to the Big 12 championship game, and they'd be left out just like Utah. But the Cougars do have a chance if pretty much every team in front of them loses, and they win out. Heading over to the Big Ten, we have 5 contenders left, and let's first start with the Michigan Wolverines. Sherrone Moore's done a great job at keeping Michigan in this playoff race, as somehow, someway, they still have a good chance at it. After losing to Oklahoma in the non-conference, they've won 7 of their last 8 games, with their only loss being against USC. They beat Central Michigan, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Washington, Michigan State, Purdue, and Northwestern, and in that Northwestern game, they barely got by, but it doesn't matter. Michigan is currently 8-2, and if they win out, they'll go to the Big Ten Championship and have a chance. But in their way is number 1 Ohio State, and despite beating them for a few years in a row, I don't think it's going to happen again. But if Michigan wins out and then wins the Big Ten Championship, they're 100% going to get in, and they may even have an outside shot if they beat Ohio State, but not likely. Right in front of the Wolverines, we have the Oregon Ducks. Oregon made the college football playoff last year as the number 1 overall team, and they've returned this year despite dealing with a bunch of injuries. They beat Montana State, Oklahoma State, Northwestern, and Oregon State to start out the year before beating Penn State in what ended up not being that great of a game. They got beat at home by number 7 Indiana, and since then they have rallied off 4 straight wins, including a way too close for comfort game over Iowa, in which they won after a late field goal. To finish the year, they play USC in Washington, and that game against USC is pretty much an elimination game. But if Oregon wins out, they would be 11-1, and while they probably wouldn't make the Big Ten Championship unless Ohio State or Indiana loses, Oregon should feel safe at 11-1 at getting an at-large. As I said, the USC Trojans are still in contention for a playoff spot, as they are currently ranked number 17th in the country and are 8-2. This is one of the better teams that Lincoln Riley has had, and they have a good quarterback in Jaden Mayava, 2 good running backs, and then 2 really good wide receivers. They beat Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, MSU, Michigan, Nebraska, Northwestern, and number 21 Iowa, and their 2 losses are to Illinois on the road and Notre Dame. With the Irish likely getting into the field, it's pretty simple for USC. They need to beat Oregon, and they need to beat UCLA, and they need to be 10-2 going into Selection Day. I'm not even sure if it's statistically possible for USC to make the Big Ten Championship game, but they would basically need everybody to lose for them to get there. But if USC goes into the bracket selection at 10-2, they would have a chance at it, as they would essentially take Oregon's spot in that case. For our second to last team, we have the Indiana Hoosiers, and at this point, they would have to lose to Purdue, and then probably lose 75-0 against Ohio State for things to even be questionable. I think Indiana is as close to a lock right now, as they are undefeated at 11-0, as they beat Old Dominion, Kennesaw, Indiana State, Michigan State, UCLA, Maryland, and Wisconsin. They had the come-from-behind win against Penn State, they beat Oregon on the road, had the game-winning drive against Iowa, and they hung 63 on Illinois. Indiana's resume is as good as anybody's, and they should kill Purdue next weekend, but even if they don't, they'll still go to the Big Ten Championship and likely get in even if they lose their last 2 games. Indiana's in a great spot, and this will be Coach Sig's second appearance. And for our last team in the Big Ten, we have to talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes. After beating Texas, Grambling, Ohio, Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Penn State, Purdue, and UCLA, the Buckeyes are currently undefeated, but if they lose to Rutgers and lose to Michigan, not only would they be 10-2, but they would miss out on the Big Ten Championship. Even then, I still think they would get in, as there's just no way they'd actually be left out, but it would make things a little bit uncomfortable. Ohio State is as good as a lock right now, and we'll see if they can repeat as national champions. Notre Dame is currently independent, and they're likely headed towards another college football playoff appearance, despite a weird start. They dropped their first 2 games to Miami and Texas A&M, who are both in the field as of right now, and since then they have rallied off 8 straight victories against Purdue, Arkansas, Boise, NC State, USC, Boston College, Navy, and Pitt. 3 of their last 4 games actually have been decently impressive, as USC and Navy are still technically fighting for playoff spots, and Pitt was ranked in one of the hottest teams in the nation. To close out the year, Notre Dame has Syracuse and Stanford, and as long as they win those 2 games, they're going to the playoff. There's no way that they would get left out based on where they're ranked now, and Notre Dame is hoping to make another run this year. James Madison is one of the best stories in college football this year, as led by their young hotshot coach Bob Chesney. They are currently 9-1 and undefeated in conference play. Their lone loss came by 2 scores on the road against Louisville, and they have wins over Weber State, Liberty, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, Louisiana, Old Dominion, Texas State, Marshall, and App State. To finish out the year, they'll play against Wazoo and Coastal, and at this point, James Madison needs a couple of things to happen. They need the ACC and Big 12 to get one bid, they need Notre Dame to lose, and they need the American Conference to fall apart. Because even if JMU goes 12-1, it may not be enough to get them a bid, as while JMU is an incredible story, they are fighting an uphill battle right now. And now we get to the SEC, which still has a lot of teams remaining. On a graphic I saw last Saturday, the Tennessee Volunteers are technically still in the playoff hunt. I'm not really sure how, but I guess they are. So far, the Vols are currently 7-3, and after beating Syracuse and East Tennessee State, they lost a close one by 3 in overtime to Georgia, and then they beat UAB, Mississippi State, Arkansas, and Kentucky before losses to Alabama and Oklahoma. Granted, these games were semi-close, but after a win over New Mexico State, they'll finish off with Florida and Vanderbilt. I mean, even if Tennessee goes 9-3, their best win will have been against Vanderbilt, and I'm sorry, that's just not going to cut it. I'm not even sure how Tennessee has any shot at the playoff, but I guess there's some sort of number that gives them a 1% chance or something. In front of the Vols, we have the other team from the state of Tennessee in Vanderbilt. Currently, the Commodores are 8-2 and are enjoying a special season with quarterback Diego Pavia. In my opinion, they have a much better argument compared to the Vols, as they ended up starting out with wins over Charleston Southern, Virginia Tech, South Carolina, Georgia State, and Utah State before having their first loss on the road to Bama. They then beat LSU and Mizzou before losing to Texas by 3. They most recently beat Auburn in overtime, and to finish the year they have Kentucky and Tennessee. If Vanderbilt wins out, and some other SEC teams fall to 3 losses, then they have a chance at getting in as an at-large. I would still say it's very unlikely that the Commodores hear their name called. Coming in front of them is the Texas Longhorns. Currently, Texas only has a chance because of where the college football playoff metrics had them ranked last week, as after losing to Ohio State in week 1, they beat San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston before losing on the road against Florida. Honestly, it wasn't a great start to the season. They've barely gotten by in a lot of their games, including some super close wins over Kentucky and Mississippi State. They barely got by Vanderbilt, and then their best win comes against Oklahoma, who had a bad John Mateer at the time. This past weekend, Texas got put in their place as they got beat up on by Georgia 35-10, and I guess if they win out and beat Arkansas and A&M, they will be 9-3, and then maybe they get in because of a tiebreaker and only having 2 losses, but I would say Texas's chances are not very high. They absolutely have to win out from here, and no matter what, it's going to be close for the Longhorns. For a little while, it looked like Alabama had a chance at being the top team in the SEC, but they are now 8-2, and there's a world in which they could miss out on the college football playoff. They have a ton of ranked wins over Georgia, Vanderbilt, Mizzou, and Tennessee. After losing to Florida State, who's terrible now in week 1, they most recently lost to Oklahoma, and this gives them 2 losses. While they still only have 1 conference loss, they have games against Eastern Illinois and Auburn. If they lose that game to Auburn, that would put them at 3 losses and likely take them out of the SEC championship game, which in that case, they would be sweating it out. Having losses to Auburn and Florida State on your resume would be terrible, but Alabama's definitely going to close it out, and they'll end up going 10-2, and no matter what, if they get to Atlanta, they're going to the playoff. The Oklahoma Sooners got themselves a huge win this past weekend, as they are now currently 8-2, and they have 2 straight road wins over top 15 teams. They beat the Tide and the Vols. While they ended up losing number 8 Ole Miss at home and Texas in the neutral site, they also have wins over South Carolina, Kent State, Auburn, Temple, Illinois State, and Michigan, which is looking better. At this point, Oklahoma's path is pretty straightforward as well, as they just have to win out. If they beat Mizzou and LSU, I think no matter what, it's good enough to get them in, and they'd also have a chance at maybe going to Atlanta. With everybody talking about Lane Kiffin being linked to pretty much every job in the country, he needs to focus on making sure Ole Miss gets to the playoff. At this point, I think it's more than likely, as the Rebels are currently 10-1. They have wins over Georgia State, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tulane, LSU, and Wazoo, before they suffered their first loss on the road against Georgia. Since then, they beat Oklahoma, South Carolina, the Citadel, and Florida, and to finish off, they'll play against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. Somehow, someway, Ole Miss honestly had a pretty easy schedule this year, as at this point, they only actually had 2 tough games against Georgia and Oklahoma, and they went 1-1. It doesn't matter though, because even if Ole Miss loses to Mississippi State, I still think they would get into the playoff at 10-2, and after last year's debacle with Jackson Dart and them losing 3 games, they'll get a chance to prove it this year. For our second to last SEC school, we need to talk about the Georgia Bulldogs. After starting out the month of September with wins over Marshall, Austin Peay, and Tennessee, they ended up losing by 3 at home against Bama. This has been a season of comebacks for the Bulldogs, as they came back against the Volunteers, came back against Auburn, came back against Ole Miss, and came back against Florida. Since then, things have been more comfortable though, as they beat Mississippi State pretty bad on the road, and then beat number 10 Texas 35-10. Georgia is really starting to find its stride, and for the rest of the season, they'll play against Charlotte and Georgia Tech. Even if they somehow lost to Georgia Tech, which I don't think they will, the Bulldogs would still get into the college football playoff, And at this point, I think they're pretty much a lock to go to the SEC championship game at 7-1 in the conference. But no matter what, Georgia will be headed to the playoff, and we'll see if they can redeem themselves after last year's early exit. For our last team, we have to talk about Texas A&M, and my goodness, college football is weird. The Aggies are currently 10-0, as they won games against UTSA, Utah State, Auburn, Mississippi State, Florida, and Arkansas. They also knocked off a top 20 LSU team, beat Mizzou on the road, and then have 2 improbable victories against Notre Dame and South Carolina. They stole that game in South Bend after a botched extra point and a 4th down touchdown. Then after being down horrendously at home against the Gamecocks, they came back in the second half, won 31-30, and Marcel Reed flipped the switch. They just extended Mike Elko, and currently the Aggies are 10-0, and I guess the only way they would miss the playoff is if they lost out, which would include a loss at home to Samford, and in that case, they'd be justified at getting kicked out of the SEC for that. That's not going to happen, as long as A&M beats Samford, they're going to the playoff, and I think they're pretty much also a lock to go to Atlanta against Georgia. But yeah, today I talked about all the college football playoff contenders left, and what do you think? Which of these teams will be eliminated next weekend? Who do you guys think will end up being the 12? And what topic should I do next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out some of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.